Hi, podcast listeners. Welcome to the A World of Difference podcast. We have so many guests on this show making a difference in our lives, making a difference all around the world with the expertise that they bring. And yet so many of you are reaching out to me saying, you want more. It's not enough just what we're putting on these podcast episodes for you. And so I am here to extend a very warm welcome to you to our Difference Maker community, where you can join for as little as $5 a month to get all this extra content. Out the gate, you're going to get 30 plus mini-sodes of exclusive content not available for the regular podcast listeners, and an exclusive mini-sode every month. And you'll get exclusive voting power to help us pick podcast topics and more. And that's at our Changers tier. There's 3 different main tiers and then an extra larger tier. But whatever tier that you join at, you will be included in this extra content. And I know that many of you are wanting to go a little bit deeper. And so even though it gets a little wild in there sometimes because of how deep we go, I want you to join us there. This extra content is very special. It means a great deal to me to be a part of this community with you. And I would love to just exchange ideas or perspectives that you have around these different episodes. And that's the place where we do it. So please show up to our Difference Maker community. Give us $5 out of your pocket every month. And I think that you'll have a lot of fun in there because we do. And I would love for you to join us. So go to patreon.com/A World of Difference to join us there. Welcome to the A World of Difference podcast. I'm Lori Adams Brown, and this is a podcast for those who are different and want to make a difference. Our guest on today's show is Sam Thiara. He is a professional who is a global citizen, loves to travel, loves to write and speak and teach, and engage individuals basically in their personal and professional development. He works with teams and organizations on alignment and has worked with 45 different nonprofits. He's currently a professor at Simon Fraser University up in Vancouver, Canada, at the Beedie School of Business. He's the founder and chief motivating officer at Ignite the Dream Coaching and Consulting. He has a couple different TED Talks that are amazing to watch. Check them out. And he also has a couple different books that he's written. And his personal tagline is basically teaching us how to write our own stories, which is everyone's life is an autobiography. Make yours worth reading. His books are personal storytelling, discovering the extraordinary and the ordinary, and his own personal journey of lost and found, seeking the past and finding myself when he went to India to find his ancestral roots. Welcome to today's show, Sam Thiara. Hello, Sam. Welcome to the A World of Difference podcast.
I look forward to being here and to be able to share some insights with your audience today.
Yes, we're so excited to have you and hear all about your world travels and your writing and your speaking and everything. So I'm sure some people are already familiar with who you are, especially maybe in India, which is where your ancestral roots are from, and up there in Vancouver where you live. But maybe give a little background of who you are and what you do.
Sure. I think the best way for me to describe it is a way that I always like to share, not only in class or if I, at an event. I always say, there are 5 things that guide and direct me in life: servant leadership, story sharing, activator igniter, champion enabler, and community do-gooder. And those 5 things have enabled me to help and support individuals, teams, organizations, educational institutions, and nonprofits to their pinnacle best. But they've also helped to make me into a speaker and a storyteller, an author, a writer, and a blogger, a community activator, an entrepreneur, an educator, mentor and a coach, and a problem solver. So all of those things resound around those 5 things. And I think one of the things that it's really captured for me is this whole sense of curiosity. And that's where the travel and all the work I get to do, it really ignites the curiosity that I have within me.
That's great. As a mom, I've really sort of had this conversation with my kids in the last few years, especially as they're entering their teenage years, is, curiosity is something we get trained out of us. And I know that you're in higher education, and so you probably
have this kind of conversation or thoughts around this a lot. But when, kids are starting out in like kindergarten or even preschool years, we foster that curiosity and we want them to do hands-on learning, and it's like explore all this sensory stuff. But then it seems as though you get into your middle school years, your high school years, and certainly by the time you're, at the university level, we're just, the curiosity can kind of wane, and the way we teach one another how to live our lives. But in my mid 40s, I'm sort of trying to reignite curiosity for myself, both for emotional health reasons, but also just for the world is so full of something to explore, and curiosity drives so much of intelligence and, what we're going to invent. So yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts around that in terms of curiosity.
No, and to your point, I mean, I've done 2 TEDx's, and the second one I did was about how do you activate the voice within to be louder than the noise around. And the premise of this is, rather than thinking about what you're going to do or what you do, let's focus on who you are. And I love the way that you brought that up, because in that talk that I gave, I said there's a narrative that we've all lived. And at preschool and kindergarten, maybe even grade 1, a question was asked of us: what are you going to be when you grow up? I mean, and we choose astronaut, doctor, teacher, and we chose these honorable positions. And then practicality sets in. And next thing you know, whether it's as you move along and then you get through high school, and at university, I'm mentoring and coaching 3 to 8 people a week. It's been about 5,000 conversations to date, because they've distanced themselves from what they set out to do in the beginning. So now you want to reactivate this curiosity piece. Well, tell me who you are. And they struggle with this. And, then fostering through these conversations, whether it's students or alumni, recent grads, and middle management, all the way to senior management, I'm having these conversations to help them reignite, who are you? And then let's figure out the journey that you want to go on.
Yeah, that's wonderful. We all need people like you in our lives to remind us and just to help us ask the questions. So much of life is just going through the motions. And I know, many people, my senior in high school told me yesterday, he said, people are just now getting over 2020 and we're almost in 2022. It's like, yes, that's true. We've really been through a lot collectively. Yeah. And, I'm seeing stuff in the news today about new surges of COVID. Again, it's like people are so tired, and we can't predict what's going to happen, and it can feel really exhausting. So I think it's never been more important than to figure out who we are while the world seems to be spinning completely out of control. And I know that this is a real passion of yours, because you cared so deeply about who you are as a person that you made a journey to India to discover your ancestral roots. So I'd love for you to tell us about that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a British-born Canadian. My parents come from Fiji Islands, which is near Australia, and my grandfathers came from India. And you get that question, what part of India are you from? And I look at them and I say, well, I was born in England, raised in Canada. And they're like, no, your parents, what part of India are your parents from? I'm like, well, my parents actually come from Fiji Islands. And then they all of a sudden say, are you Indian? And I'm like, well, my grandfathers come from India and my ancestors. And then others will be like, well, you're not Indian, you're Canadian. And Lori, the one I really like is where they say, no, really, where are you from? I'm like, okay, let's start with planet Earth. This is where I'm from. And I think a lot of people struggle with this identity piece. So for me, it was like growing up in Canada, you assume the role of a Canadian. So, even though I'm visible minority and I look Indian, but that's what Canada is a hodgepodge of cultures and people. And I remember, becoming like this idea and mentality that, I'm Canadian, and, we play hockey and we, eat hot dogs. And, when we scrape our knee, we bleed maple syrup. I mean, that's what Canadians are. Well, then all of a sudden you might get beat up in school because someone says, you're Indian, and you look at them confused. It was only when I got to university and a much more global audience, because in high school, there literally was like 7 visible minority out of 500 kids. But when I got to university and a much more diverse group of people from around the world, I suddenly, came in contact with a lot of people from India, Pakistan, all of those countries. and they had embraced because they never left their identity. And it really felt like I was missing something, and I was hungry to just refill this piece that I sort of pushed aside. So in 2004, I told my wife, I said, I'd like to go to India. I've traveled to a number of places, but I had never been to India before. And I said, I'd like to go there. And with this reason of two things. Number one, to try to realize what I was missing with regards to this Indian identity and Indian culture. But the other part was to seek out, because nobody knew where our ancestral roots were. Like, they sort of had an idea, but they didn't know the village. They heard of the town and the district. So the name of the village is Chadori. It sits about 6 miles from Garshankar, which is the town in the district of Hoshiarpur. But nobody, because we were so distant from it, and from a global perspective, nobody knew where our village was. And I managed to secure a faded photograph from my village. And these are people who are in my village. Now, the picture itself is very faded. It's a dingy yellow color. It's about 3.5 by 3.5. Literally, that's what I had to go by, as well as the sparse information. But there was a lot of, you won't find it. Why are you looking? If you find it, you're not going to get a good reception. And I said, no, but this is something I really need to do, is to try to recapture this. So traveled to India. And the way I describe it, I was a foreigner going to a land that shouldn't be foreign to me, in search of a needle in a haystack, but not knowing where this haystack even was. Now, the identity piece, as well as the search for my ancestral roots, became two parts of this journey. The identity piece was interesting because I just suddenly, while I was on this journey and experiencing India through the eyes as a traveler, not a tourist, I suddenly had an epiphany at like 4 a.m, and I just woke up realizing, I think I know what this means. My life prior to India was what we call a thali. And a thali is an Indian platter, segmented. So I'm British, Indian, Canadian, Fijian, and 11 years I played in an Irish military pipe band. So there's some Irish chutney in there as well, but they were all segmented. Well, it made me realize I'm not a thali. I'm actually a rice dish called khichdi. And khichdi is a blend of flavors that you make at home, and it's got the spices, it's got the vegetables, the rice. It's the equivalent of, let's say, an omelet. So for me, that was this realization of identity, is that I'm a blend of cultures, a blend of flavors, but so is everybody else. We are all a blend of cultures and a blend of flavors. So that's the realization I had about my identity. And I don't know if you have a question about that, or I can always go into the ancestry part too.
Yeah, no, I love your illustration, and you made me hungry because I love North Indian thalis especially, and it's sort of like this Japanese bento box, the
Yes.
Indian version. And I mean, we're huge Indian food fans, and all our family, if we eat Indian food, all 5 of us are happy, and we don't all 5 agree on a lot of things, but we all agree on Indian food. But yeah, I love that description. We are all a blend, whether we admit it or not. If we go far enough back in our ancestry, and I would say most people in the world don't know how to go far enough back to really find a lot of the diversity that's there, but there always is at least some, right? I mean, even if it's not what we would consider racial diversity, there's a lot of diversity in our backgrounds. And one of the things in the United States, at least, we have these demographics, like when you fill out a job application or you're enrolling your kid for school, or sometimes health forms, they'll have these specific categories of racial categories, which are what the US Census is based on. And it's not complete enough for many people, especially with the way the US is at this point. But for people like you and like me, that we would consider growing up third culture kids, where you have, minimum 2 countries that you're kind of from, so it's hard to answer the question, where are you from? So like, for my story, it's, my parents were from the States, and I was raised in Costa Rica and Venezuela. And then you create this kind of third culture, which is a blend of all those cultures. Even if you have 5 or 6 cultures, that you're blending it into this third culture experience, right? And so it makes it hard to fill out forms, even, ethnically, if you're talking about culture, of course, but even racially, it can be quite hard because, you know, in my background way back, there's some Native American in there, and they put this category, which is really strange. It'll just say white. And you're like, wait, but there's no other colors listed. It's like, what
Yeah.
is white? Does that mean everything else is non-white? That seems awful. You know, so I never clicked that. Like, I never checked that because it feels like, well, no, I'm a mix too. I always put 2 or more races, but occasionally they don't give that option. So I just say I prefer not to say, because I mean, yes, do I have white privilege? Well, of course, because I look white. But at the same time, you know, we want to honor the parts of who we are, and however, you know, blended it is from around the world. And so I love your description of that. Yeah. And I would love to hear more about your experience of sort of writing out your autobiography, sure, and why you think it's so important for other people to dig deep and find out who they really are.
Right. Well, and that's where the ancestry part came in, because, you know, it wasn't an easy search, because literally all you have is a photograph, very little information, and people who said you can't, you won't, you shouldn't. But you know, and the journey, you know, in the book that I wrote, Lost and Found, Seeking the Past and Finding Myself, what I shared was the ups and downs, because you go with this anticipation and the information we had wasn't accurate. And, you know, we went to a bunch of places, houses, and, you know, people would look at this photograph and they'd be like, well, you know, maybe the house is over here, and I think so-and-so looks like this. And, you know, let's go there. And we would go there. And this anticipation, until they say, no, this isn't the right house. And you're like, oh, and then it sinks down. And then you try again, and it's like, no, and you keep on going. And I just remember saying the next day when we were trying to find the village, I said, no, you know what? Forget what everyone has said. I'm throwing all that aside. I'm going to get to the town called Garshankar, and we're going to talk to people. And again, people were like, why are you searching? And you had never heard of it and all. And slowly that window of opportunity felt like it really was closing on me. Having found my identity, it was like, okay, but at least I managed to recoup that. Well, one gentleman said, wait, you're looking for this village. I think it's up the road 6 miles in that direction. And I was like, okay, but I'm very guarded at this point. We drove, and there's this archway, and an old man is sitting there, just basically staring at the ground. And he looks at this photograph, which is faded. I can't even really make out the people. And he says, oh, I don't know about the house, but there's a guy in the back, and he looks like so-and-so. And he gets into our vehicle, and he drives to this one house. And in my journal, I write down, here we go again. And like this whole aspect of, I'm ready for another defeat. Well, he goes up with this photograph, and people come out. And a bunch of people, when they came out, this one lady in this photograph, she saw this photograph and she basically said, that's me. Who are you guys? And all of a sudden it was like, wait, am I hearing this? Like, you're in this picture? She goes, yeah, that's me. Who are you? When I explained who I was, she suddenly realized that we were directly related to that person and to that house. So I got to realize my cultural and my ancestral identity in that place. And I went with determination, and I went with persistence, and not listening to the noise, and overcoming these obstacles. Because it was important for me to do this, that I went to India with Ziploc bags. I went out into the fields, I scooped up dirt, and I brought it home to family members who had never been to India, who would probably never go to India, so that they would have this. Now, I've told you the ending, but it's the journey that's the most important part, Lori. And to your point about that, and I wanted to just sort of shore that up because it relates to what you just asked me. You know, I think it's really important that if anything, you must start early asking people, because that oral history evaporates right before your eyes. We put our work, our priorities, everything goes as our routine, but those oral stories start to disappear. And I just recall when I was talking to family members, they would have sparse information, or I think, and you know, they would have their discussions and conversations, and I'm trying to record all this and get the details. But I was fortunate that I could find it. But I get people saying, well, it's great that you found it, but I will never seek out and find my village or even my roots. And they say the only thing I can tell you is, we know that our ancestors come from Sicily, but we don't know anything, no records. And I'm like, okay, if you go to Sicily, is there something that connects you to this place, knowing that your ancestors are from this island? And they're like, actually, it did. I felt like, what, there is a part of me that connects to this place. I said, you don't have to find the village, the town, the district. Just the fact that you are in a place that feels comfortable and it feels like you belong, you've been able to capture that essence of your identity. I mean, that's where I don't want people to think, oh, you found it, I will never find it. And it's not, no, we have the ability wherever you go, if it feels right. And I mean, I think for me, the point in this whole story was when the lady realized who we were, and eventually she used the words, "You're home." And that just really struck a chord with me to say, I've arrived. But it's something that anyone can do, but it's important to capture this because, eventually, I hate to use this word, but we will cease to exist. How many generations before we are totally removed from memory? And as a result of it, just the fact that you can capture that identity piece and be able to share it with others around you, it then lies in perpetuity because that oral story just keeps on passing down.
Wow, that's such good advice. I mean, really, in a place where, the world just keeps shifting in so many ways and it seems to be moving so fast. I think that's such good advice for people because, as a person who's raising the next generation and, the attention span is so much, shorter than it was even for my generation. And I'm sure you're seeing this at the university level. History is just so important. It feels like it's getting lost. And some of the things that I was taught growing up, it seems that people don't even know anymore. And they're really things we don't want to repeat. So our family histories are also important, doing, genograms on your family and figuring out what were the struggles and how can we not pass those struggles on to our kids, like all of that. Good. And therapy is actually important. But I think just for the story itself to figure out, I think especially in a time when so many people are having mental health struggles, to know that you came from something, the good and the bad, because every family has those kind of stories. It's so important. My parents, a few years back, they both did the DNA test where you can figure out, and find on the map. And so we were trying to figure all these things out. And it was crazy because in my mom's side of the family, there's this link to the Earl of Stirling in Scotland. And we're like, what? Who is that even? Oh my gosh. Who's even been to Scotland in the last many generations in our family? And so, at some point I'd love to go there and just visit and find out, names and see, gravestones of this whole, maybe I have a castle there. No, I'm just kidding. Not like that, but it's just good to know because how many people in the many generations, I think he was lived at the same time as King James. So it was a long time ago. But, the Americans that came, I think they came to Nova Scotia at first and then sort of came down to Virginia and different places. You can see it on the ancestry, right? But it is fascinating to trace it back and know that we do have such short lives here on earth, but we come from generations and that history feels long when you start to dig into it, and it can give us meaning and it can give us purpose for all the things we want to do here on A World of Difference, which is to take our opportunities in this generation to make the world a better place. So I'd love to hear more from you around, I know the phrase carpe diem, how do we seize the day and what does that mean to you in terms of making a difference?
Yeah, I mean, the first TEDx I did was discovering that extraordinary in the ordinary, and that we live in the ordinary are routines, but embedded in the ordinary are these tremendously extraordinary experiences. And they don't have to be these epic pieces. They are just straightforward little things, but they have purpose and meaning. So carpe is an acronym that I use for storytelling, and carpe diem, seize the day, but carpe is what I do. Carpe stands for curiosity, appreciation, reflection, perspectives, experience. You capture all 5 of those, you actually can build your story. So curiosity, I go through life with a curious nature. My radar is on, and things will stop me, which are insignificant to the average eye, but it stops me. What I do is I appreciate people, situations, and things for more than what they are. And that adds significance to it. And then what I do is I appreciate it. So appreciating, but then adding more purpose and meaning is reflection and reflecting on it. There's your perspectives that comes in, because when you reflect, you bring in your perspectives, and then experience, you capture it and make it into a story. So for example, I remember at the university, I was walking into a building, and just before I got there, the door was propped open with this wooden wedge doorstop. And curiosity kicked in. I just stopped and I looked at this wooden wedge doorstop, because we've all seen these in doorways. And instead of just going through, I stopped. And then the A kicked in, which is appreciation. I was appreciating the doorstop for more than what it is. It's doing something. It's holding a door open for me. So I started reflecting, and then the perspectives started coming in. And I'm standing there looking at this, and I can imagine people in the offices nearby just looking, is he okay? Like, he's just standing there. And when I was reflecting and bringing my perspectives in, it suddenly hit me. That doorstop is very reflective of people in my life that have helped me, who have held the door open. They didn't open the door, they held it open. They are my doorstops. I would never call them doorstops, but they're my doorstops in my life. And I captured it as an experience, and that now becomes a story that I can share with other people. But that's a process that we can go through that just takes a simple wooden wedge doorstop and makes it into something even more significant in our lives. That's the extraordinary in the ordinary.
I love that. Yeah. And I think we often don't notice the ordinary because, it's just something that happens every day. But when somebody like you comes along and says, hey, notice it because it matters. And, I think some are saying, at least I can't speak for Canada, but I have relatives in Canada and they're amazing people. Everybody loves Canadians, right? So they're over in Victoria, so not far from you. Yeah, on my mom's side. But at least in the United States, now that I've been here for a couple of years, I hear a lot of conversations around how the culture, in general, it feels very narcissistic, but is increasingly narcissistic because of all the ways that our culture has shifted to things being tailor-made on algorithms just for you to find your own news feed and that type of thing. Like a lot of things that even here in Silicon Valley maybe has fostered this level of narcissism. And my understanding of narcissism is that in general, the narcissist's biggest fear is to just be ordinary, that there's this grandiosity that inherently comes along with it. But what you're calling us to is so good, is that in noticing the ordinary, there is a lot of extraordinary there. And I think that one of the things we love to talk about here on the World of Difference podcast is how coming together with others, extraordinary things can happen, but it really, if it revolves around just one person, whether that's a narcissistic thought or whether it's just, hyper individualism of Americans or whatever, that throughout history, we tend to highlight this one white dude typically that did something, but there's usually a team of people around. And so with all of us noticing this kind of ordinariness together and it becomes extraordinary, that we tend to appreciate in a very mindful way how to move forward in healthy ways to make healthy changes. So yeah, what are your thoughts around that?
Well, actually, I'm all about analogies and acronyms, and I'm going to share another analogy with you. What I do is I carry with me puzzle pieces, and it hits really home with what you're saying. So I give away puzzle pieces. It's been about 5,000 to date, and a single piece of a jigsaw puzzle is ordinary. If I, Lori, gave you one piece of a jigsaw puzzle, what can you do with one piece? Not much. That's what people feel like. They feel like that single piece of a jigsaw puzzle. They don't know where they fit in. They don't know what the bigger picture is. But I'm going to transform it into extraordinary right before your eyes, magically. The way I do it is to say, instead of focusing on that single piece, let's focus on the satchel. If I give you a piece of my puzzle, do you realize my puzzle will be permanently incomplete without you? Do you realize how important you are to me? And the fact that there is no one piece that is the most important piece, they're all important. And it's so interesting because when I share this in my class, or if I'm speaking at a conference, or just one-on-one with somebody, and I share this and I give them that single piece of a jigsaw puzzle, I physically see a transformation in their face, that they're like, wow, I get this. What I've been told by many of these people is some people have it taped to their mirror and it reminds them every morning, someone said I mattered. It travels in backpacks around the world. It's in curio boxes. It's in wallets. And when they see me at events, they pull it out to show me they still hold on to it. Mm-hmm. And I'll hear from people 10 years later saying, Sam, I just opened up a drawer. I saw your puzzle piece, and, they'll send me a note on LinkedIn saying, yeah, you're still with me. I think it's such a simple tool, but it has so much significance. And I just think the world needs more puzzle pieces personally.
So good. I'm going to totally use it. And I'm going to credit you because I know a lot of people steal ideas out there, but everybody listening to this, if you use the puzzle piece analogy, and please do, because it's very good, give Sam the credit for it.
But Lori, here's what I always say, Lori, it's not about my ego.
I know. Yeah.
If you do this, you don't even have to credit me. I mean, I bet you people are doing it around the world. And, if it just means that someone feels a part of your life, it doesn't matter to me that I get credit for it. It just is this silent smile that I have and the satisfaction that, you're doing your one little part to change it. But it's such a simple thing, which can have so much significance. And it doesn't have to be a puzzle piece. I mean, you could give Lego pieces. You could, give people seeds and say that as it matures and as it grows, this represents you as an individual, and nurturing whatever is your signature, make it.
I love it. Well, that means that you do truly believe in the analogy wholeheartedly, if you don't even feel like you need the credit for it. But I would say that this is a very powerful analogy. And with Gen Z and all the anxiety going on that they're experiencing, having gone through as children, many of them, a pandemic, time, which was really difficult. I look at my own 3 teenagers and think, wow, I don't know how I would have gone through what you're going through, being so isolated on a screen for 18 months of school, and in a time when socialization is so important in your formative years. And I think that message of being a puzzle piece is so beautiful. It reminds me of the Shel Silverstein book. You've probably read it, which is The Missing Piece in the Big O. Have you read this book? The children's book. Oh, it's so good. You should pick it up.
I will.
Yeah. And basically it's this, it's a triangle that's trying to find a circle that has almost like a pie piece coming out, and it tries to fit in all the different circles, but it never quite fits. And then this complete circle comes near the triangle and says, hey, I'm not missing any piece, but if you'd like to roll next to me, that's me, we can do that. And so they start rolling. And as they roll, the triangle turns into a circle. And then they're both complete circles that can kind of go through life together. So, I mean, it's a great analogy for marriage and actually that kind of thing. My husband and I read it when we were dating. We have the book, we read it to our kids, but it kind of reminds me of that. Like we're all, a part of something, and figuring that out together. It's the whole idea of not being, you don't have to be alone. We're all part of connection, is how we're meant to be as humans. That connection is kind of everything. And so figuring that out as you're part of a big puzzle is really important. I would love to know more, because I know that you not only wrote your own autobiography, but you encourage other people to kind of write their own stories and as self-discovery, but also to figure out why they're here and their purpose. So how does that play into all this?
Yeah, I mean, my first TEDx was about storytelling and helping people realize their stories. And it's always fascinating because people are afraid to share their stories because they're afraid of being judged. I remember in my first book, right at the very beginning, near the beginning, I wrote a phrase that said, there's fear in me in writing this book because of what people may think. But the bigger fear is, what if I don't write this book? And that made me suddenly realize when I had that, just as I started, and prior to this, Lori, I wasn't a writer at all. And it was scary because you're just like, where do I start? What do I do here? And you slowly find your voice and you find your way. And the moment I stopped trying to think about who my audience was, and instead I just wrote from who I want to be and to share with people, the words just seemed to flow. And that's where it materialized. The book, that first book, it provides the carpe practice, but it also is like a workbook which says, here's some reflective parts that you can work on, and start working. Like, tell me about a time when you went on a trip somewhere, and what was that experience like? What did you like about it? What was a challenge? And just starting to get people to think about that. And so that's what that first book was, which actually led me to the second book, Lost and Found. And I'm glad that Lost and Found was my second book, because it's almost like it was preseason, or we're just working your teeth into this first book to work out the kinks and the bugs. Because I would say that my second book, Lost and Found, Seeking the Past and Finding Myself, it's my magnum opus. Like, it's my life's work. I'm going to be writing more books in the future, but I don't think any book will be better than that Lost and Found book, because my heart and soul is really poured into it. And it was written not because of notoriety, status, or money. It's just a beautiful story that needs to be shared. That's the reason I wrote the book.
Well, that's wonderful. Thank you for sharing yourself with the world. I know that that's not easy. And, Brene Brown has been one of the greatest teachers for all of us around the area of vulnerability and her research. And then having to be vulnerable herself. I actually rewatched her very famous TED Talk again for like the umpteenth time yesterday. And, just pressing into that vulnerability, because we need connection. And that was what her research showed. Nobody wants to stand on a TEDx stage or put in a book the things about themselves that are so vulnerable, but that is the way to find connection. Like, ultimately exposing ourselves, the good and the bad, is how we find that connection with other people. And I've heard many authors say it the way that you did. Like, I'm so scared to write this book, but I'm also kind of more scared not to. And so, thank you for that courageous moment that you had. I think that's also what Brene Brown has learned in her research, was courage, which courage comes from the root word of heart, like kind of putting your heart out there. Yeah. That's how we find that connection. So thank you for that book, and for encouraging other people as well. I'd love to know if you have any cultures that you've encountered in your travels, or, where you've lived, different ones that have spoken to you, maybe have taught you things that you'd like to share with us.
Yeah, I think one of the ones that, I always pick up things, and I'm going to share with you just this brief quote that I put in my Lost and Found book, because it really captures the essence, and I think you relate to it, and I think so many people do. Travel isn't always pretty. It isn't always comfortable. Sometimes it hurts. It even breaks your heart, but that's okay. The journey changes you. It should change you. It leaves marks on your memory, on your consciousness, on your heart, and on your body. You take something with you. Hopefully you leave something good behind. And that was by Anthony Bourdain. And it just really captures the essence. And for example, I've traveled to the Middle East numerous times for work. And it was interesting because the first trip I ever made, I was landing in Kuwait. And that's when Iraq was going through major turmoil. And Iraq is right next to Kuwait. And the number of people who said, you shouldn't go, it's a mistake. Haven't you ever seen the news? Have you seen what that place is like, or just the region is like? It's dangerous. But I went. And I remember I experienced not just Kuwait, I experienced the entire region. I had 8 different stops to do. And I came back and people were asking, how dangerous was it? And I said, oh my gosh, it's extremely dangerous. And they were like, really? What did you see? I said, an experience. I said, yeah, oh man, I tried to cross the road and it just was so hard. And they were like, what do you mean? And I said, well, the road safety was really a challenge there. They're like, well, what about the kidnappings? What about the explosions? What about, the terrorism? I said, it's safer for me to walk around in many of those countries, even at midnight, than it is for where, I've traveled in where I live. And it was always interesting because, they have this perspective, and it's not and the perspective they see is their truth, but it's not the truth. But Lori, I'm going to share with you that there is something extremely dangerous in the Middle East that I have encountered. And what that was is I finished speaking at a conference in Bahrain on a Thursday, and I'm leaving on a Saturday. And one of the conference goers, this wonderful young woman who's from the region in Bahrain, said, I'm going to pick you up on Friday and I'm going to take you around and show you Bahrain. And it was perfect. That's great. I look forward to it. And she showed up on Friday morning. And as I came to the vehicle, she said, Sam, I'm so sorry, but our plans have changed. And I'm like, no, if you have to go, please don't worry about it. She goes, no. My mom says I have to bring you home for lunch. Here's the dangerous part. If you're invited to a household and the mom's cooked a massive array of lunch, you have an empty plate in front of you and she's got a spoon, she's going to keep feeding you.
Yeah.
That's dangerous because she's not going to stop. The hospitality is what's dangerous. And my only recommendation to your listeners, eat slow because she's going to keep feeding you. That's the dangerous part that I encountered. I mean, it's such a lovely hospitality piece. And there are times where people have said, oh, I'll never travel to the Middle East. And they give me different reasons. And part of it, what I say is, I don't think you realize the hospitality that you're missing and the culture and the food and all of that. But I said, but here's the other thing. I don't think they miss you not visiting. So it's okay. Don't go. You're missing out, but I think that they're okay if you don't show up. But it really is about shifting that perspective that instead of just focusing solely on the news, either travel, and if travel is a challenge, talk to people from a community, and you would be amazed at how wrong people are about each other.
Oh, I love it. So good. And yes, the food in the Middle East and the hospitality.
I know.
It's just world class. And yeah.
And dangerous.
Dangerous because you might get fat from all that
food. Oh, man, yes.
Yes, obesity is the biggest danger. But yeah, I agree. I mean, I live here in the Bay Area and we're welcoming a lot of different Afghans who are arriving. It's such an honor and privilege to welcome them here after all so many of them have gone through and, sacrificed for peace in their own nation and around the world. And so, but yeah, it is like, if you don't have the chance to travel, maybe to South Asia, many people can't go to Afghanistan right now. We can definitely go to their communities and learn from them. And I'll just say that people arriving in some of this first wave that was coming out of Afghanistan here recently when Kabul fell to the Taliban was, they came with their suitcases. I mean, it's like families of 7 people in a little one room hotel room kind of thing with 2 double beds. And so they're having to take turns sleeping, but somehow they come out with this tea set and tea and like pistachios on cute little trays. It's like the hospitality is just out of this world, and they'll keep filling your teacup because the hospitality is amazing. And so, but yeah, I mean, I just think it's kind of the question you asked about your book. Like, you're afraid to write it, but what if you're more afraid not to? It's like, maybe you're afraid to travel. Maybe you're afraid to go to that community on the other side of your town or state or province or whatever. But maybe you should be more afraid of not, because really the whole idea of missing out, the FOMO of that is significant, because we, like you said, and this is, part of your messaging that I really love is, there's something we can learn from other people that we need, and that perspective we can all share with one another is so valuable. So any last thoughts on that before I ask you my final question of the day?
What I'd like to share is this. I can appreciate and understand how difficult life is with people due to COVID. And again, an acronym that I came up with was CARE. And I really want your audience to embrace this, whether an individual, organization, school, doesn't matter. And what CARE stands for is collaboration, adaptability, resilience, and empathy. Let's look at what each of us have in our storehouse and how can we share with each other and support each other. And that collaboration is going to lead us into some great experiences. Adaptability means everything is shifted and changed on a dime, and we've had to become adaptable, but let's carry this adaptability mindset into the future. Resilience means This isn't over next week, next month, maybe even next year. This is a marathon. Let's focus on it as a marathon and build resiliency into our lives. And many of the people that you've experienced in your travels, that I've experienced, one thing that they hold that I think we miss here is resiliency and empathy. Let's start showing care and compassion to each other, because we don't know what people are going through. So, just be there, be considerate, and be understanding.
That's wonderful. What a great message for this year and next year and every year. Just the simple concept of caring. And I love that acronym. It's great. Well, I'm sure you have at least one person, maybe more than one person, that you admire that has been a change maker in some way, on a global stage or just in your own life. But as we're in this change maker series, that's something I'm asking everyone, is to point us to somebody who's a change maker you admire that we could also learn from.
Yeah, well, part of it is my father. I think when I was 9, he became a paraplegic from an industrial accident. And what I learned from that is not to dwell on the 1,000 things that you can't do, but he instilled in me many of the values and ideas that I carry with me today. But the other part that I'm going to say, Lori, is that by working in the university setting, I sit in a place of greatness by these young people who have gone on to do amazing things. It goes back to Sir Isaac Newton saying, I've been able to see far because I stood on the shoulder of giants. And these individuals, there's a stigma attached to these millennials or Gen X's, Gen Y's, even baby boomers, but the stigma based on who I have surrounding me, and it's not because I've just handpicked people. These are people that have gravitated towards me, but I've also gravitated towards them. They are change makers. They are going out to change the world. And one thing that I would say from a change maker perspective is we all have the capacity to be a change maker. And it doesn't have to be this epic change. I think all of us have this vision of wanting to change the world, make it a better place. Really, all you have to do is not be a bystander in life and just go out and support somebody, share your time, because the people that are around you that you support and help, they won't see the world the same way because of your presence. You have changed the world because through their eyes, you have changed the world for them. You don't want to change the world the way you think it should be. Let them do their own, but change the world through the eyes of the people you help, and you become your own change maker.
I love that. It's wonderful. Just a reminder that we need each other, and hearing from one another is just so important. Good listening. And as we absorb the stories, the autobiographies that we read, and the perspectives of others, it enriches us all. And we end up forming this beautiful puzzle together as puzzle pieces. So thank you for your time today, Sam. It's been just an honor to hear from you and your perspective, your world travels, your own personal story, the academic work you're doing. And so I hope that people follow you and follow your writing. Where can people find you?
So people can find me. I've got my website. So it's sam-thiara, thiara.com. There's about 180 blog posts of my experiences and words that I share with people, and that's all available and accessible. I'm also on LinkedIn, Instagram, and Twitter. So those places are accessible as well.
Great. Well, thank you for your time today, Sam. And I hope you have chances to, when a lot of this COVID stuff slows down, do some more traveling and more writing. We'd love to hear more from your experiences and what you're learning. Thanks, Sam.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to share. And I leave your audience with my favorite quote that I live by. Everyone's life is an autobiography. Make yours worth reading. You're a living story, a story that needs to be told. So just show your brilliance.
Love it. Thanks, Sam.
All the
Bye.
best. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Sam Thiara. Wow, what a fascinating guest. I loved hearing his story of going back to India, a place he'd never been, but his ancestors had come from, and just with his picture, and just even as he showed me the picture over the screen, this kind of faded picture of these people he didn't know with, a village he wasn't sure if he could find, and just showing up there. Wow, just the vulnerability of that was just so inspiring. The courage he showed, the
the desire to really connect with who he is based on those who came before him and his family. I just found it very, very compelling. And especially in light of how, going all the way across the world is, from Canada all the way to India, it took just a lot of desire and bravery and courage. And I just, it's very inspiring. And the fact that he wrote it down, just the vulnerability of all that, to put it in a book, to put himself out there. And of course, that puzzle piece illustration is really going to stick with me. We're all part of this big puzzle, and we need each other, and we're just one part. And it's such a good visual reminder. And just as she showed me a puzzle piece on the screen as well, and was holding the little bag of all the pieces, and it just that's what we're all about here on the World of Difference podcast, recognizing we are enough on our own. We don't need anyone else for our own personal worth, that we are all made in the image of God and whole beings and beautiful and wonderfully made and here for a purpose and all of that. And yet we are made for connection. We need one another. We don't want to live this human life alone. We have to stand alone at times. And that has been my own personal journey. And I'm sure it's many of your own journeys. And at the same time, even though we stand alone, we can find our belonging being whole people and knowing that we can work together to make a difference in this world. And I loved Sam's message for us today. He's a beautiful soul. It was an honor to have him on. I love his message that he's sharing and encouraging all of us to write, and how he even had that whole moment himself of afraid to write the book, but also afraid not to write the book. So yeah, let's think about that this week. Maybe you're a writer. Maybe you're a writer of books. Maybe you write articles. Maybe you're a songwriter. Maybe you have art forms that come in different ways, through dance or through different expressions of art, painting. And I think some of us, as we work through where we are and how we belong, it's through art forms that we can find that. So find a creative outlet or find a creative community around you that you can join and have your own voice to stand alone, but also be inspired by the art of others and to really connect in that way and learn how we can make a difference. And for all of you writing books out there, let me know. I'd love to have you on the podcast and read your book. And speaking of authors writing books and coming on the World of Difference podcast, next week we have a super exciting guest. I'm very excited about this one, Dan Stringer. Dan is living in Hawaii at the moment, but he has lived all around the world as a third culture kid. And he has written a book called Struggling with Evangelicalism, Why I Want to Leave and What It Takes to Stay. So Dan will be coming on the show to talk about his journey of growing up in Africa and the DRC, which was Zaire at the time, and then also his growing up in Nepal and going to Faith Academy in the Philippines for boarding school and high school, and coming to the States to Wheaton College, and then ending up in Hawaii as a pastor and struggling with evangelicalism and writing this book. His book has just come out, and so tune in next week for Dan Stringer. In the meantime, do some writing, do something creative, join a creative community, and find out how you are a puzzle piece and what part of the puzzle you fit into in making a difference in this world. Keep being different and keep making a difference. We'll talk next week. Bye.
As we're finishing this episode, if you're thinking, I really wish I could learn more or go a little bit deeper, well, that's what our Difference Maker community is for. I would love to welcome you in to join the rest of us there. Once again, it's only $5 a month to join, the price of a latte at your local coffee shop. You can join at our Changers tier. Difference Makers is a community that really means so much to me. It's very special because each time I have a guest on the show, I record something outside of what we give to just the regular podcast audience, where we go a little bit deeper, and then I post those video episodes in this community and we can discuss them. But also at the very beginning tier, which is our Changers tier of this community, you'll get exclusive voting power and help pick podcast topics that give us more of what we want from your perspective. You'll have access to exclusive 30 plus mini-sodes that aren't out there for the general public. And you'll get every month an exclusive monthly bonus mini-sode. At our Groundbreakers level, which is $10 a month, you can join and get all of that, but also priority access to submit questions to the podcast. And you'll get an additional 2 exclusive monthly bonus mini-sodes. And at our Trailblazers tier, which is $15 a month, the price of 3 lattes a month, you can get all of that, plus also 3 exclusive monthly bonus minisodes, and a patron shout out. So I would love for you to join us at any of those tiers. It'll help you come into this community, be in the midst of all of us, other difference makers, and we'd love to hear your perspective. I certainly would. It's a place to engage more with me and the audience around what you like, what you're resonating with, and once again, go deeper with each of our guests. So please join us in this membership community. I would love to hear your perspective and love to share this extra content with you. So show up at patreon.com/a world of difference.